Welcome to this special episode of Revolving Door Syndrome. So we've had a little bit of a hiatus, kind of unexplained, but I think it's also probably like a really good opportunity for us to talk about a year of Revolving Door Syndrome. We've got 20-something episodes out and we've met some really amazing people. But we've also had some stuff that's happened in our own personal lives, which we haven't really shared like heaps about. I think it's probably time to share about it. And who I've got on this episode actually is a really special person to me, who is, the executive producer, the editor, the man behind the podcast, my partner, Connor Aliff. Welcome to the episode, Connor.
Hey, it's great to be here. You don't often hear this voice. I think first episode I was on that, and after hearing my voice on the episode, I wasn't.
Never again.
I was like, no, I'm going to leave the podcasting to you. I'll just be behind the scenes. But after the year that we've just had, I think it feels about right to sort of have a conversation between the two of us and what the last year has been and what the podcast has become.
Yeah, I'm really proud of what we've done so far with Revolving Door Syndrome. Like, I think we've really stuck to the kaupapa of what we started it for. We've kept it going, 20-something episodes, which is amazing, and we're going to keep it going. As the name suggests, Revolving Door Syndrome, it's about the systemic issues that perpetuate inequities ongoing, and we see a lot of these in all sectors of our society and all sorts of public services, right? So we've done a lot of stuff on education, healthcare, justice system, all of these things that are so interlinked with each other, and there's so many different perspectives and avenues to, explore these issues. So I'm really glad that we've had such a great range of people on this podcast. But I think this is a great time for us to reflect on, what else has been happening? Because I think, I do, I guess in the episodes, try and share a little bit about my own experiences and things like that. But, obviously most of the episodes are about the people that I brought on, which is why I think it's great I've brought you on this time for this episode.
Yes. No, I think so. I think I obviously get to see a lot of things which no one else would get to see, and you talk quite a lot about your own experiences in the hospital.
I feel like with the podcast, because I am there talking to the people, interviewing people, but you're the one that has to sit there and listen to the podcast recordings and edit the podcast recordings, and you probably know what I've said, back to front a lot more than what I've said. Because sometimes
I can almost quote you directly.
Because sometimes I listen to the podcast episodes again, but sometimes I don't have time to, and I just remember what I remember. But I think you probably know the episodes better than I do.
Yeah, imprinted right in the brain. Yeah, you do, and I think you appreciate them in a different way when you go through it sort of more meticulously, and that is what I try to do, is go through the episodes meticulously and add some polish, because there's some
I reckon I've gotten better though. I've definitely
got, and I think that's really noticeable. Is one of the things you find is that at the start of the podcast, I think
a lot of editing,
and now I think you've definitely grown into a beautiful butterfly of a podcast host.
Thank you. And recently I've been on a couple of other people's podcasts, and it's quite interesting because you flip from being the interviewer to the interviewee, and you're like, oh, it's just like breath of fresh air, because you get to just like sit back and relax and just have some yarns. I think sometimes when I bring people on this podcast, they get a little bit like nervous in terms of like, saying the right thing and all that, and I'm like, when I flip into being the interviewee, I'm like, oh, this is actually way easier. Because when you're the interviewer, you have to be thinking about, what am I saying? What am I going to ask? Where am I going to take this conversation? And you have to be listening to what the person is saying and responding appropriately and trying to guide them to, the kind of topics that you want to talk about. It's like a lot of things to be thinking about.
It's a real art. It's a real skill. So, I think I think a lot of people attempt podcasting. There's a lot of people start podcasts. I think one statistic that sticks with me is that the average number of episodes for a podcast on Spotify is three episodes. I think that's a lot of it is just people start podcasts and they've got a really good idea, but it's really hard to keep going because it is just one of these things you have to stick at, and so it feels like a long way when you first start a podcast. Like, the idea of producing, like, having 20 something interviews, it feels like a long way, but yeah, you sort of chip away at it each time, and you slowly get there, and you build a bit of a audience and the people who listen to the podcast, and then you really appreciate that, and you get that in the messages that you receive, directly. You personally receive them.
Yeah, I think the podcast has been really good. I mean, thanks to you, you're the one who basically pressured me into doing this podcast. So
Positive
thank
peer
you.
pressure.
Positive peer pressure. And I think through that, we've gained a lot of opportunities. It's made me much more outspoken as an advocate for all of these issues. I think you made me join LinkedIn, which made me, share a lot of my ideas a lot more to other people. And I think there's like a real dearth of healthcare workers on LinkedIn. Like there are some, but I think, LinkedIn is mostly populated probably by, business people, entrepreneurs who might not necessarily understand what's going on in healthcare. And so I think that's been really great, like an opportunity. So from the podcast to LinkedIn, and then through that, kind of through other things, then getting connected with Raf Manji, who's the leader of the Opportunities Party. And then this opportunity landed into my lap of running for MP, which is basically what I've been doing for the last, 5 months. Mostly,
I'd say it's basically a year now.
Basically a year.
The start of the campaign was from when you said, yes, I'll do it.
And that was November, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a really busy year. So a little over a year ago, we decided to start the podcast. We released the first episode in August of last year. At the same time, I just started working in adult emergency, where I'd never worked in adult emergency before. Suddenly my brain was, saying that it was really happy. Yay, learning new things. Which, I don't know. I think my brain is like addicted to things that are like novel and exciting and high stakes and things like that. And then it sparked me into being like, oh, okay, well, I guess you should start studying for your pediatric exams while you're working in the adult emergency department.
I'd also like to say that I think that was also
probably you.
A little, only because I think you have quite a lot of imposter syndrome, and you don't, you require a bit of prodding and pushing to be like, no, you can do this.
The things I could achieve if I was born a man.
Oh, you should put that on a t-shirt.
So yeah, I think there was quite a lot that's happened this year. We've done the podcast. I sat my pediatric written exams, and I also had to sit my pediatric clinical exams. Thankfully, I passed all of those, but it was really challenging having to do everything. So that's the year that's been really. And
the hiatus that we've had recently has kind of just been a culmination of all of the pressure building from the campaign, which is all of our energy and time resources are going to be sucked into that, which is why there's been a bit of a. And also, I guess like
why I decided to run in that campaign for, running for Member of Parliament is sort of feeling like there was like a dearth of healthcare workers in sort of this political space as well, like not a lot of chat about health. When I first met Raf, the leader of the Opportunities Party, in early 2022, one of the things that I said to him was, what are you going to do about health? Because health is going to be a big hot topic for 2023. We've just come out of a pandemic. We're going through a major healthcare reform. People should be talking about health. I think a lot of healthcare workers don't know who to vote for, all of these sorts of things. And that's why I ended up doing it. And also, I wanted to take a break from working in healthcare because I don't know if people realize it from listening to the podcast, but you could probably read between the lines, but working in healthcare is pretty hard right now. And I think a lot of healthcare workers are burned out, probably me included. I think I've been chronically, teetering between burnout and being okay since I basically started medical school, because it's just really, really tough. And so that's probably one of the reasons why I decided to run for MP, really.
And so you thought, I'll take a break from...
A break from working full time.
From working in the hospitals that are on fire.
Well, I was working
to go just do something casual. I
was working almost 70 hours a week, and then having to study and be in hospital on top of that to prepare for exams and things like that, and it's just insane. And I was also having to look after patients that were really sick, and when you're in that mind space where you're exhausted from your clinical work, exhausted from your studying, and, other stuff. And people are like, oh, you're doing too much. And I'm like, well, actually doing the podcast and, kind of preparing a little bit for the campaign, like those were the two things that were like giving me meaning, because the work that I was doing, it didn't feel meaningful because it felt like it was just putting out fires rather than actually trying to change the system. And that's how I see the podcast and running for MP was how can I change the conversation? How can I get people thinking about healthcare differently? And, because you can change the laws, but to change the laws and make them meaningful and make them last, you have to change how people think socially as well.
You've got to change the culture in the way,
Yeah.
Do you feel that, do you feel you've done that? Do you feel you've achieved that?
I think all change, really, for it to last, has to be incremental to like a degree, right? Like you can't like have transformational change just from one person's actions. It's about, how can one person change the minds of a few people, and how can those few people change the minds of another few people, right? Like, with our podcast, we've grown it basically through word of mouth and a little bit of social media, right? Like we haven't spent any money on advertising. It's just been people sharing the podcast themselves with like other people. And I think, while it'd be great if we had more people listening, but, I really appreciate our listeners. We had, like between 800 and 1,000 listeners per a month, right, at our peak, which is awesome. That's really awesome for a podcast that is, running on very little money. But, shout out to MedWorld for sponsoring us.
Yeah, Sam Hazelden.
Yeah. But I think I did achieve that. I think a lot of people really liked what I had to say about healthcare. A lot of people, with the Opportunities Party, I was able to write most of the healthcare policy. And I think people really liked it because a lot of the feedback that we got from our health policy was that this is the one health policy out of all the parties that would actually, be sensible, and it would actually be actionable, and it would actually be effective. Even my dad, who, probably mostly votes national, even he, at the last minute, I was able to swing him to vote for the Opportunities Party because he's like, at the end of the day, you've got the best healthcare policy. But I guess the one issue with meaningful, like good healthcare policy from politicians when we've got a 3-year election cycle is that the general public and the politicians, they want interventions that, show progress within that 3-year cycle. And I guess the issue with our healthcare policy probably is that there wasn't enough that would show short-term gains. And that's why, policies where it's like, we'll fund this many, cancer drugs just seems really effective because it's something that people can see. It
pulls on people's heartstrings.
Now, and it pulls on people's heartstrings. And I think it's really challenging as a healthcare worker because you don't want to see politicians making those sorts of decisions.
Politicizing health.
Yeah. And, I guess, we're kind of politicizing health as well by, having a healthcare policy. But everyone has to have a healthcare policy, right?
Yeah, but sort of politicizing health in the sense that you're using certain illness, certain disease.
Yeah.
Which arguably that's not the role of politicians. Arguably their role is to direct funding, and create long-term visions and solutions they're going to implement. But as you say, the sort of the 3-year cycle that we have sort of stymies any kind of...
Yeah. And I think the thing is, like, the more I realize it, like, I would say probably, like, I wasn't very politically engaged until a year ago, right? I was relatively politically agnostic. I voted, sure, but did I get involved or did I really think about stuff like to a, deep degree previously? No, I didn't. I mean, I only turned 29 this year, and a lot of young people, aren't engaged, probably because a lot of politicians don't really talk to them, and a lot of people, like their parents, probably don't talk to them much other than saying, oh, you should just vote for whoever we vote for, right?
Yeah.
Previously, sure, like I probably like leaned left a little bit, but I think, most young people do, probably a lot of healthcare workers do, because we see a lot of the effects that, poverty and inequality has on healthcare outcomes. And then I think the more time I spent thinking about politics and thinking about what, the different parties are saying and all that, the realization that, like, we really should be depoliticizing things like health. Health shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be something that come
be
election time that we go, "Oh, we're gonna look at what this party's done for health. Look at all this. They're messing it all up." And it's like the issues that we have are so deeply entrenched over decades. It's not the responsibility or the issue or the being caused by one single government.
Yeah,
but that's what we do. We lay the blame at the feet of the current government.
Yeah, when it's sort of like a feat of, the best cooperation ever that, both Labour and National, governments over the last several decades have sort of, messed up our healthcare system, right?
I think that was one of your best lines you used at the debate.
Yeah, well, it's not a left or right issue. It's an everybody issue, right? Like healthcare affects everybody. It affects you whether you're a baby or, an elderly person. Health affects you cradle to grave.
And it affects you as well, whether or not you kind of are sort of rich or poor, because those things have flow-on effects, right? In our hospitals, if our hospitals are clogged up with people with preventable illness, it does not matter if you pay for X, Y, and Z private healthcare insurance.
At the moment, right? At the moment, because our, acute hospitals are publicly funded services, private health insurance doesn't mean anything, right? Really, if you're acutely unwell and you're in an emergency. But that could change, right? You look at what's happening in America, or what's always happened in America, which is a completely privatized healthcare system. We could be heading that way. We could be heading into a situation where, just like America, where all healthcare is provided privately through private health insurance. And so in America, every time you access healthcare, just about every time, there is somebody in the middle clipping the ticket every time that you try and access healthcare, the health insurance providers. So, in New Zealand, if we don't do anything about our public health services, that could happen, right? Because more and more of our public healthcare workers are leaving the profession, either to go overseas, go work in private, or leave healthcare completely. And that's the message that I've been trying to share everywhere that I go, whether it's because I was running for MP in the Epsom electorate, so whether it was in an Epsom-based debate, one of the wealthiest electorates in the whole country, and just trying to, tell them that actually private health insurance will not save you in an emergency. And I think people, starting to think about that actually. They started to think about themselves. They started thinking about, oh, wow, we've got a really underfunded aged residential care sector that, a lot of these, retirees who are wealthy, they might end up needing that service, in a not too distant future. They've got children and young people who are not able to access the healthcare that they need. And we've got young professionals who also can't access the care that they need and also aren't paid very well. And they're all thinking about leaving New Zealand. And so these issues are all interlinked. And how are we going to get, a well-funded aged residential care facilities in New Zealand when we're not going to have the young professional, tax base to actually pay for it?
No. You're right. And I think no one's thinking, I don't think the public have caught up to that idea yet, but also at the same time, I think the politicians.
We started this conversation, which is great.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone really wants to address it. And by addressing it, sort of it's ripping off the Band-Aid and it's going, this is an issue and we all have to face it. And I think that no one is prepared to deliver the bad news, I think that's it. No one wants to be the bearer of bad news and say, actually, things have got to change.
Yeah, what I would like to see is more cooperation, between parties of all sorts of the spectrum to, improve healthcare. Because I think, like I said, it's not a left or right thing. It's an everybody thing, right, in healthcare. Yeah. But I guess what I worry about is privatization by stealth. So the more we defund the public healthcare system, the more people will want to rely on the private healthcare system. I've got friends asking me, oh, do you think I should get private health insurance? And I'm like, this isn't like a question that I can answer for you. You got to make that decision for yourself, really. But I think increasingly more and more people are going to be thinking about, putting money into private health insurance instead of being like, should we pay more tax? That would be, going directly into healthcare. So, but I think that this healthcare problem, it's it's going to be an issue for a long time. And looking worldwide, most developed countries are struggling with healthcare right now, because every time in Western healthcare and the Western model, which is about treating disease and not about prevention, every time we get better at treating a disease, people live longer, but they live longer with more complex health issues. And then it just sort of snowballs to, greater and greater burden on our health system in terms of the amount of care and the complexity of the care that we bring. I saw this really interesting post on LinkedIn, and it was talking about job creep and complexity creep. And, when we talk about things like, I really value the work that nurse practitioners bring to emergency departments and all sorts of places, because they definitely help out. But what the secondary effect of that is that because nurse practitioners will take on the less complex tasks and frees up the times for doctors to do the more complex stuff. What that ends up doing is that as doctors we end up only looking after really complex patients. And then what I noticed in the emergency department is that we're trying to make things way more efficient. So, patients who would previously come through the door and get seen by a doctor, they'll just get seen by the nurse assessing them, and then the nurse will discuss with the consultant, the senior doctor who's on call, and then that senior doctor maybe eyeballing the patient would be like, okay, well, we need these tests, blah, 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 and then just refer them on to another specialty without being properly seen by somebody at the door, which, it doesn't necessarily change anything in terms of the wait time or anything like that, but at least when they get seen by somebody, all the investigations are done. So all of these things sort of triaging out patients, referring patients out, patients being seen by nurse practitioners or whatever, means that emergency doctors, their job is becoming more and more, our job is becoming more and more complex. And then things like, healthcare AI coming along, that's going to suck up the thing that healthcare AI may be able to tackle is the simple healthcare conditions, right? You put your vital signs into this machine, you tell them what your symptoms are, and it spits out a diagnosis and an investigation and treatment plan and whatever. And then this patient doesn't need to be seen by a doctor because this hypothetical healthcare AI model comes along and fixes the issue. But then it will even more just lead to more and more complex patients being left over for the doctors. And then when you think about KPIs of number of patients seen per hour, right? You used to be able to expect X amount of patients to be seen, let's say 10 patients in 10 hours for a junior doctor, right? But then if your patients become more and more complex because all the easy stuff gets triaged out to somewhere else, then you're left with the more and more complex patients that take longer and longer and longer, and it's going to look like you're not doing a good job.
Yeah, when you're talking about the KPIs there, I want to bring it back to the debates that you were involved in, and I think you meeting some of the candidates who would kind of spit out party lines and things like these, things about we're going to put in place targets and things like that. But it's we're putting out these ideas and putting out things that to the voter base sound great and going to grab votes. What you've experienced in your conversations about health, and also talking with other MPs about that, is there anything that you take out of that?
I think for me, again, it goes back to that imposter syndrome thing again, right? So when I come to a debate, I'm like, okay, so my experience leading up to this campaign is that I've been a healthcare worker. I've always been a healthcare worker since, I essentially got into medical school and then became a doctor. That's my life so far, basically, right? So I don't have experience in other sectors. I don't have experience in infrastructure or, the economy, business, things like that. I don't have experience in that. I'm happy to say that. And so when it comes to debate, sometimes I'm a little bit less sure of myself when I talk about these things, unless I've done my research, which is why I spend a lot of time leading up to debates.
You spent
I spent a lot of time reading about what's happening in the news right now. What are these big hot topics? What's the research? What's the evidence? Right? Because I don't want to go there empty-handed and not know what I'm talking about. But then I feel when I see and hear how other politicians talk, I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And so you've got politicians who have no real experience working in the fields that they're, have got portfolios on, or they're minister of whatever. And they feel more than happy to freely talk about this topic that they have no prior experience on. And a lot of it comes to like health again. So, we've got, our outgoing Minister of Health was a doctor, and our incoming one is also a doctor. So,
Which is pretty
there's
unusual.
that, which is unusual because most
Yeah.
ministers of health, haven't been healthcare professionals. But thinking about other politicians, they're all very happy to talk about health, very happy to, for example, talk about things like putting targets in place for like emergency department wait times. And the thing is that a target is good, right? Yeah. A target is good if it's about monitoring where our problem, emergency departments, which places need more resources, right? But at the moment, we're in the situation where we don't really have much resources. We've got a very finite amount of emergency healthcare workers in New Zealand, and putting that target on, like it depends on what they're going to do with that target. They've not really talked about it, because if the target was to say, Middlemore Hospital Emergency Department, which is chronically been struggling for decades, if we put a target there to say, okay, well, we will show how bad things are in Middlemore Emergency Department so that we can, shift more healthcare workers in there, or increase, the amount of, permanent staff we can hire there, right? And we will maybe like put a targeted salary so that people who work in that department get more pay than like elsewhere or whatever, because it's pretty shocking. When I talk to other people who've worked there, they're like, yeah, it's pretty bad there. And, when we get patients who don't want to go there, bypass Middlemore Hospital to come to other hospitals, they're like, yeah, it's really bad there. So everything's telling me that things are not going well there. So slapping on a target isn't going to magically make things faster for the wait times. But if the target is there to, one, gather the data, and two, actually redirect, resources, then it could work. But it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. But also, it's when you look at historically how targets have been used, it doesn't give you a,
it doesn't give me
a lot of
heaps.
hope.
No, not heaps of hope. But I think a lot of healthcare workers probably didn't really know who or what to vote for this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot that didn't vote.
Yeah. Well, there was it 1 million people that didn't?
Yeah,
vote,
about 1 million people who could have voted didn't vote.
Boy.
Yeah, a lot of them younger people, a lot of them lower socioeconomic people.
You could have
and I
voted
think
an entirely new
Yeah,
party.
exactly. And there were a lot of reports on election day of voting booths with huge wait times, errors, IT issues and things like that. And it's just
Sounds very fishy to me.
Sounds very fishy.
Sounds.
I mean, it's just not resourced in the right way. And it's tricky. Reflections on this election campaign, I think, because when we said that we were going to do it, because I had to make it like a team decision.
Well,
right?
initially
because
when you said you were initially told, oh look, it's not going to require too much effort. You just turn up to the debates, you kind of do whatever, keep your head down. It's not too much time, not too much effort. And I think that you had that in your head until you realised how competitive you were, and then you realised, no, I don't do things by half measures. And so you threw yourself into it with everything you had. And but I think that was a good thing in a way. You learnt a lot.
I think it was a really good experience. I met a lot of people from all sorts of different backgrounds, some really great organisations out there, and learned about a lot of people's experiences. And I think I honestly wish that more people got involved in politics. I think it's politics is for everyone,
more people from
right?
health,
more people from health, but more people in general, right? Because I think politics is for everyone, and we want a parliament that is reflective of the population that they serve, right? We want, we don't want a parliament that's just full of career politicians. No. We want a parliament that's got people from all walks of life, all sorts of different expertise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether that be, nurses and doctors, to firefighters, to farmers, to liquor store owners,
Everyone needs to have
everyone needs
to be able to have their say, right? Yeah. And it's quite... I think it was what was really difficult about this, the result was that, we had a really good party vote result for a very low budget campaign overall, 2.07% for a party with next to nothing and only 13 candidates, right? I think it was fantastic. But, that barrier to entry of the 5% threshold to get into Parliament is huge, and that's probably why we haven't really seen any new parties come into MMP without, a handshake or a cup of tea, that kind of thing, a special deal, or someone who's already a well-known MP, leading a new party. No, those sorts of things. It's just really quite challenging.
Yeah, but also the major parties are sort of disincentivized from doing that anyway because
they don't want to share power.
They don't want to share power, and also as they've seen, as the national government, as the National Party have seen, they let the ACT Party sort of get in basically through David Seymour winning this Epsom seat that you stood in as the electorate, and they were on like 0.5% of the vote, the party vote, which was nothing, but they won the seat. But now you look at them and they're like pushing 10%, aren't they? So it's like they've seen now how, you get a toe in the door and you can really crack that open.
At the same time, it's like, well, a lot of ACT voters, there are certain things that I could agree with ACT, things like, the pushing for like the euthanasia bill. I think that's about, human rights to be, able to make those choices for yourself, right? In terms of like, if you've got a significantly debilitating and life-limiting illness, right? And so there are certain things I'm like, okay, they've got some good ideas. A lot of the stuff I do disagree with them on, but, I think if you find any two parties, they'll have lots of things that they disagree with, with each other. And I think a lot of the voters for ACT were probably, disenfranchised or, disillusioned like National voters, right? So if National did a better job, ACT probably wouldn't have so many voters, right?
Yeah.
Right? And similar for like Labour and Greens. Greens did very well this year, but probably mainly because Labour did so poorly, right? Like I think those parties don't necessarily bring people
Greens
from the other side.
Would like to disagree with you, but perhaps.
Well, I think Chloe did. I don't know if you want to include this, but I think Chloe did a fantastic job in Auckland Central. To retain that seat. That was a very difficult seat, and they'd done a good job to get 2 more electorate seats as well. But they won them off red seats. So if they were able to win them off blue seats, I think that would be a really, really good achievement. But you just look at Labour, and they've done not a very good job this campaign, and they've lost a lot of the party vote and like electorate seats. So yeah, I think those other side minor parties, they win votes and seats off of the major parties when they're not doing so well.
Yeah, they say that that we don't ever vote a new government in; we just vote the old one out. And I think in this instance, it wasn't a resounding. Oh, we really want a national government.
I think one of the reasons why people are against reducing the threshold for entry in terms of the party vote to enter into Parliament is that people are worried about, these sort of fringe, parties getting into Parliament, right? They're worried about. Anyway, I won't name names, but you know who I'm talking about. The fringe parties getting into Parliament, and
Brian Tarmaki's and stuff.
Won't name names,
but they're also representative of a certain part of the population.
Yeah, and I think this might be controversial, but I think people want to have their voices heard, and if they don't make their voices heard in this way, they'll find other ways to make their voices heard. So controversial opinion. Maybe we should have, the MMP threshold lowered, and then, if some of these fringe parties were able to come through, they'd have 1 or 2 seats in Parliament, maybe. I don't think you'd be able to do much if you had 1 or 2 seats in Parliament and nobody really wanted to do business with you in terms of the other parties, right?
Well, yeah, you're completely right. That's exactly it. If no one wants to work with you, well...
then you won't be able to achieve anything, right? Yeah. When we talk about, David Seymour and ACT, well, National and ACT have history, from previous leader Don Brash being a previous leader of National Party. So they've got history. They can work together, But I don't think they necessarily would be able to work with Brian Tamaki or Liz Gunn.
I thought you said you weren't going to name names. Yeah. No, it's And your dad's view is that that we should just lower the threshold to basically what one seat is, which would be like something like 0.82%.
Something like that,
the
you know,
vote.
because then you'd have a parliament that was actually representative. Then you wouldn't have this whole wasted vote thing, which is probably the biggest bugbear of this campaign, you know, trying to get people to realise that actually if everyone just voted for the party that they believed in, you know, we'd probably get a different looking parliament.
And you might even get increased participation in democracy because, you're right, you'll find there'll be more people with more incensed to get involved in politics because you go,
well, I think it comes
I
down to
don't need to suddenly get 120,000 people to vote for me to reach the 5% threshold.
I think it comes down to like political apathy, right? Because apathy is probably the greatest enemy of democracy because people don't feel inspired to vote. People don't feel inspired to read up about policies and parties, let alone actually show up on the day to vote or, you know, advance voting or whatever. And this comes down to education as well because, you know, being 29, I graduated high school in 2011 and I received no education really about the political system. All I got was, hey, you're graduating when you're 17, you should enroll to vote so that you're ready to vote when you're 18. That's all the education that I had on the political system. So everything that I've learned is through, you know, reading a little bit on the news here and there, basically, leading up until, you know, a year ago. That's basically the knowledge that I had about the political system is that, 2 ticks is what you do when you know, go and vote.
So it's unsurprising that people come out of school and don't really know who to vote for. And, you know, I think a lot of the time it's...
But we don't make it accessible for young people.
We don't.
But, you know,
Also,
we
haven't given people the tools or the understanding to be like, why is what this party's saying good? Or why is what this party's saying, why does it align with your values or not?
Which is why, like, you know, a huge shout out to Chloe Swarbrick, because I think one of the best things that she has done is made politics more accessible for young people. She's inspired, you know, a lot of young people to get involved, you know, through her, you know, run for mayoralty and then running for the Greens. You know, I think she's done a really good job at getting young people involved in politics, and it's really exciting to see things like, you know, Hana Rafiti, you know, winning, you know, hopefully winning that electorate seat, that Māori electorate seat. And so she's only 21, so she, you know, really amazing speeches she put on talking about, you know, the kohanga reo generation is here now. So I think that hopefully in the next election we'll have even more, well, hopefully we'll have more young people turn out, because I don't know what the young people turnout was for this election.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you were saying about how you're talking about, you know, trying to create change even with the podcast and with the political campaign, and that it's kind of incremental, but it is that sort of, you go on, you speak out, but you can inspire a couple others and those other people can go on and it sort of can snowball. And so, yeah, it's really good to see younger people getting into Parliament, because it shows people that, you know, from whatever background and from whatever walk of life, actually, that's an achievable thing, and it should be aspirational.
Yeah, well, I think my one hope in this campaign is that I have inspired more people to think about participating in politics, and that I've inspired more people to think about, you know, speaking out in terms of, you know, people who are healthcare professionals, speaking out about the issues in healthcare, because it's something that affects all of us. Yeah, I think this campaign was really challenging, and it took up so much time and energy. Like, it was just so all-consuming, and, you know, that's probably one of the reasons why we weren't able to get to, you know, more podcast episodes, which we have a couple more in the bank. We do. But I think it's given us more fire, I guess, to talk about more of these real issues in further episodes, further interviews to come. It's given us a lot of good connections with people who are politicians now, or people who are retired politicians, or people from other various organisations that I've met. So I think it's been a huge amazing opportunity. I want more people to do it. I've been telling everyone that they should, think about running for politics.
It's become a running thing now. Everyone you meet, you're like, oh, you should run. You should run.
Well, I think the thing is that I never thought about it until someone said you should do it, right? And sometimes you just need that one person to give you the opportunity and tell you, no, you can do it. You'd be really good at this. For a light bulb to switch on and be like, oh, maybe I could do this. And I've realized, yeah, I could do it. And I think I could do this again. I don't know if 2026 is the year that I'll do it again. I think we'll have to, think about this again because it's a huge undertaking.
Time, but also money
as well. We had to work during this as well. We didn't have the luxury of being paid by Parliament to also, be running for Parliament at the same time that, incumbent MPs have that luxury. So we had to work at the same time and, people were asking me, oh, why are you doing the politics? And I'm like, oh, well, because the job is really terrible. And, and then there would be times where, maybe I hadn't been at work for a week or two and then I come back, picking up extra shifts and then I'd be like, oh yeah, no, this is why. Sometimes I forget, why I, did this politics thing. And then I'd go into work and I'd be like, oh yeah, this is why I did it because it's horrendous in here. There's a lot of people who are really sick and a lot of people who are sick because of, things that they were out of their control.
Because of the decisions that have been made by our politicians in the last couple of decades.
That's right.
I think that's another one. And that's another, to quote you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think this probably summarizes why things have been a bit quiet. But... Well, we didn't want to use the podcast as a platform to promote my political career. We wanted to be really careful about that. To keep them separate.
But I think it's also nice for you guys to hear about why we've been busy and why we haven't put out any episodes recently. But we got more to come.
Yeah, we're certainly. This is not the end. This is just the beginning.
Why do you keep quoting me?
Hey, look, I'm sure you're not the only person to have said that. I'm sure it's been said in probably many a movie and TV show and film.
All right, so, okay, fine. One last question.
Oh, yes.
Right? Do you want to ask me the question or do you want me to ask you the question?
Let me think of a good question. Okay, let me think of because I've been, as the producer and editor of these podcasts lately, I've been critical of some of these last questions because they normally, it started out as like, oh, what's your favourite ice cream flavour and stuff like that. And then slowly it got to actually quite serious questions. And I was like, oh, the whole point of the last question was...
Okay, fine.
Okay.
You ask a silly question then.
Okay. What is your favourite animal?
My favourite animal? I really like giraffes.
Why?
Because they're so funny. Who would design a giraffe? They're so tall. Their necks are so long. I just think that they're so funny.
Is it also because your scrubs look often like giraffes?
A little bit. And I just think I think there's evidence to suggest that... No, don't worry. Actually, it was a different animal. But I just think giraffes are so funny because their necks are so long. If you, in your mind, pictured, if you designed your own animal, to... be able to function in the wild and, be safe against predators and thrive. I don't think you would design a giraffe.
No, you're right. It
beats all odds.
It seems like the kind of animal a 4-year-old would draw.
Yeah, it seems like an animal that shouldn't exist. And I think they look like such wonderful creatures. I don't know if I've ever met one. Yeah.
Do they not have some at Auckland Zoo?
Yeah, probably. It's been a while. I don't know.
Oh, maybe we should go and say hello to the giraffes. Anyway, stay tuned for future Revolving Door episodes. We've got a lot more to come. And as I said, this is just the beginning.
Thanks. Revolving Door Syndrome acknowledges Māori as tangata whenua and Te Tiriti o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We recognise the inequities and challenges faced by Indigenous and vulnerable groups and acknowledge our duty to work towards closing the gap.